What's happening, my fellow culinary enthusiasts? I'm Josh Champion with Emerald Coast Chefs, and today is all about French onion soup. Man, what a great dish. The perfect example of where comfort food meets class and elegance. You find this from fine dining restaurants to Irish pubs, but not all French onion soups are created equal. So today I'm going to show you a few key things to make sure that your soup turns out where you really have that pop of flavor that you've come to know and love. So stick around because I'm going to show you how to turn this into this. All right, so to get us started, I'm gonna add a little bit of clarified butter here to my Dutch oven. This is one of the few recipes when we work with onions, garlic, a few things of that nature that I actually start in a cold pan. And so the purpose for that is just, we want to really evaporate the water off and let these caramelize and develop the sugars in the onions naturally, as opposed to going in with high heat and just blasting those on the outside at first. So with the clarified butter, the milk solids have been removed, so it increases the smoking point. If you don't have any clarified butter on hand, don't worry about it. Just add a little olive oil and just use chunks of butter. That'll be fine. Let's go ahead and get our onions cut. So with these onions, I'm just cutting off each end and then cutting these in half. And then we're going to cut these in strips, and these strips are referred to as julienne. I've had French onion soup on the menu with my private chef company since I started this company in 2020, and it's probably one of the recipes that I get asked for the most. And it's not that I ever mind sharing recipes, but one of the key factors with this soup is not really, like all cooking, as I say, it's not really the recipe that it's based off of, but it's your understanding of the techniques and the principles at play here, and your ability to capitalize on those correctly that's going to yield the best possible product for you. All right, so we've got our onions all cut. I'm using an enamel-coated cast iron Dutch oven. Feel free to use a stainless steel stock pot, whatever you have on hand. So the key here is that we're going to be evaporating the moisture out of these onions, letting their natural sugars develop. So we want to do this over not too high a heat. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started at medium heat just to let these onions start releasing some of their liquid. I'm going to add a little salt, and we don't want to add a ton because we'll finish the seasonings at the end. We may want to reduce our stocks a little bit more. So we definitely don't want to start out getting too salty in the beginning, but the purpose for me adding the salt right now is it's going to help these onions start releasing some of their water off so that we can get that water cooked off and get these caramelized back down. So this whole process should take you somewhere around, for a pot of onions that size, say 7 to 8 onions, an hour and a half if you do it correctly. All right, so I'll just give these guys a quick little stir. And then we'll let these guys come up to temp and start giving off some of their liquid. All right, so we've got our onions started cooking down. Again, this process is probably going to take somewhere around an hour and a half, maybe even an hour and 45 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and get our croutons cut so we can start putting these together. All right, so taking a look at our bread crouton that we want to use for our soup. There's a variety of options that you have. There are some things we kind of want to shy away from in a couple different directions. So number one, we don't want anything that is going to be overly heavy and dense, but we also don't want something that is too aerated. So I would probably not use a heavy, dense bread like a pumpernickel or something like that. Certainly not a rye or anything that's going to mess with the flavors of our soup. But also, you don't want to use anything that's maybe too airy, like batard bread or ciabatta or something like that. So what I have here is a French baguette. This one in particular is made by Leidenheimer's, which is an amazing company based out of New Orleans. These little baguettes here are the best po' boy baguettes that were ever made. So I'm just going to cut a few slices. We don't want these overly thick or overly thin. I'd say somewhere a little more than half an inch, maybe. Don't get too caught up in that. It's not crazy important, but you want to have enough bread there that this is going to soak up some of the soup, but you also don't want it taking up the space of, half the bowl that you're putting it in. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a few of these on a sheet pan. All right, so then I've got a little softened butter here, and I'm just going to spread that on our bread slices. I do like to go pretty generous with this, and I do like to hit both sides as well. So, all right, so bread is buttered. I'm going to give our onions a quick stir. When they're in the early stages and giving off so much water, you don't have to monitor or stir these quite as much as when we get into the latter stages. That last third is going to require considerably more attention than getting started will. All right, so my bread's buttered, and then I've got a little granulated garlic, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a little garlic and a little salt to each side of this. And whenever we season something and we want to get it spread evenly, we always want to go a little high. So whenever you're spreading out your seasonings, don't try to get down here right on top of something. Add a little bit of height to it, and that's going to help you get that seasoned more evenly. And then after our garlic, I'm just going to add a little bit of salt. I am using salted butter on here. Obviously, if you are using unsalted butter, there'll be a little bit further gap in the seasonings there for you. All right, we're going to pop these into a 350-degree preheated convection oven, and probably take somewhere around 12 to 15 minutes for those to cook through. And so while my bread's toasting, I'm going to go ahead and stir my onions again. These have definitely let go of a lot of water. They've probably cooked down somewhere around halfway. I'm not seeing any browning or caramelization starting yet. Still a lot of water, but man, these smell amazing. I wish you guys could be here to smell this. All right, so we're somewhere around halfway through the cooking process of our onions. They are now at the stage that we would consider translucent, just meaning they're no longer crispy. They've been cooked down and softened. However, they're not really to that sweet caramelization stage yet. As far as what type of onions to use, I recommend a yellow sweet onion of some sort. I do see red onions sometimes used in French onion soup. Red onions do have more flavonoids than any other type of onion, but they're not as sweet as some varieties of yellow onions. So these are actually Vidalias from Georgia. It can be a little bit tempting at this point in the process to go ahead and crank that heat up and start browning those onions and kind of speed this process up. But I really, really, really want to encourage you not to do that, because again, it's taking the time to properly evaporate off this water and letting those sugars in the onions develop naturally that really yields the flavor profile that we're looking for here in this soup. All right, so our soup croutons are done, again, 350 degrees in a convection oven. And understand with this, we are not making garlic bread, we are making a crouton. So these do need to be completely crispy all the way through. You don't want these soft and buttery in the middle, like you would if you were making some garlic bread to go with pasta, because that's just going to turn into a ball of dough. And we want this to stay crispy and absorb all of that brothy goodness out of our soup. So we're now somewhere around roughly an hour in, and our onions have given off, they've reduced in volume by, I would say, a solid 2/3, maybe even a little bit more. And I'm starting to notice a lot more of that sticky texture that will come as the onions give off their water and a lot more of that sugar develops in between them. We've started to get a few of those brown bits in the bottom of our pot. Do not be alarmed. Those are supposed to be there. We need those there. In classic French cooking, we refer to those brown bits in the bottom as fond, F-O-N-D. Fond is one of the staples or the cornerstones in French cooking of sauce making, of making soups, of a way to generate flavor. So if I can give you one tip above all else for making French onion soup, it is that fond. It is the natural caramelization of those onions. There is no ingredient that we can add. There is no anything else that we can do that will change what these onions can do naturally. We just have to give them the right time and the right conditions to do that. The fond is getting a little bit thicker and heavier between each stir, so we're going to let this go ahead and keep doing its thing. Essentially what's happening here is the sugars from the onion are caramelizing and forming those little brown bits or fond along the pan. And then the remaining leftover water that still has not evaporated off yet is kind of deglazing that pan and breaking that fond down. So what we want to do is just repeat this process over and over, keep stirring until we get to the point where there's really no more water or liquid left to start breaking that fond down. at which time we're gonna add in the liquid to finish off our soup. All right, so our onions are now officially caramelized. We have made it through that stage, and it's time to add some liquid into our pot and finish off our soup. Traditionally, the next ingredient that we would add to the pan would be sherry wine, a Spanish dessert wine. However, being from Kentucky, I have a strong affinity for God's nectar, or as we call it there, bourbon. And so I'm going to add about a cup to this. And I think more than just saying, hey, I'm going to splash bourbon in this because I'm from Kentucky. What the bourbon really offers in this dish, a lot of depth, some extra background notes. You get a lot of the same flavor profile that we're already putting in the soup with kind of caramel and amber and then some of the heaviness from the oak. So that lends itself really well to doing this. Since this is a higher proof alcohol, I'm actually going to let this cook down just a little bit and go ahead and burn off the rest of that bourbon before we add in our sherry wine. Smells amazing. So after giving that just a second for the alcohol to evaporate off a little bit, as well as the onions to absorb a little of the bourbon flavor, I'm going to go ahead and add our sherry. The two most common categories of sherry that you're going to see are going to be dry sherry and cream sherry. Dry sherry is traditional. It's going to have a lighter body and be less sweet than cream sherry. But I like the soup a little bit, the added sweetness, since that was the whole purpose of us caramelizing the onions to begin with. And I also think that the heavier body, the added viscosity of that is nice in the soup. So I don't mind that at all. But feel free to use dry sherry if that's what you have on hand or what you prefer. I'll go ahead and crank the temp back up a little bit. Medium, high heat, cook the alcohol off and reduce the sherry by about 2/3. I'm going to go ahead now and add my garlic. We don't want to add big chunks of garlic in our soup, so just going to use the dried granulated garlic. And then this is also a wonderful time to add our dried herbs. So this is just a basic dried Italian seasoning that's got some dried thyme, oregano, marjoram, and a little basil in it. This is going to give a lot of background notes throughout our soup, as well as some depth and add some flavor profiles. We're still going to add fresh herbs at the end, as you will see. But if we were to add the fresh herbs right now, most of that fresh flavor would just cook out by the time our soup got to where we need to be. So that's why we're going to use the dried herbs. All right, so I think our alcohol is burned off and our sherry is reduced, and now it is time to go ahead and add our stock. I cannot stress enough the importance of using a good quality stock. Making your own best, buying a good quality label from the store, better than buying a cheap quality label from the store. Even buying nicer quality labels, be aware you may have to reduce this a little bit to get that richer, more intense flavor that you may be looking for. And that was part of the reason I talked a little bit in the beginning about when we season the onions, we just want enough salt to draw out the moisture, not so much that we're going to have the desire to reduce our stocks more, but not be able to because we're already at that threshold of salt. So I see a lot of French onion soups get made solely with beef. And I see several get made even like half and half beef and chicken stock. It's totally up to you to kind of find the flavor profile that suits you best. I have found somewhere around, I would say about 3 parts of beef stock to 1 part chicken stock is typically what I go for whenever making this. But again, play around with that and find the exact flavor profile that you are looking for, which is the whole reason that you're here to learn to make this anyway. All right, so our soup has come back up to temp. Everything is starting to kind of marry with our stocks and our flavors here. I've got some fresh Italian flat leaf parsley and some fresh thyme. Make sure when you use parsley as an ingredient, as an herb, that you are using the Italian flat leaf. As far as I know, the curly stuff is only for 1985 steakhouse buffet commercials. I don't think there's any other culinary use for that. All right, so I'm just going to finish this off. A little salt. And these herbs. And we'll get this stirred in. We've adjusted our seasonings. Fresh herbs are in. Just about ready to set this up. I want to go ahead and finish off with one last thing. I like to finish off with a little bit of butter. I've got about a stick here, so you can decide how rich you want your soup and what amount of butter works for you, okay? All right, so getting everything put together, I've got one of these classic soup crocks. If you don't have one of these, you can just use a coffee cup, anything that is going to be ceramic and stand up to a little bit of heat underneath your broiler. So I've got our soup ladled in. We'll take one of our croutons and just go ahead and drop that guy right in the middle. And then I've got some smoked provolone cheese here. You can just put this on a sheet tray and do this in your oven right underneath the broiler. Works fine. I have forgotten my torch more than one occasion and had to do it under the broiler, and that's how we do it mostly in the restaurant industry. So feel free to do that at home. I am going to use a torch, and I've actually got this propane plumber's torch. I despise those little butane handheld culinary torches. The only thing they are good for is lighting a good cigar at the end of a long day. As far as for creme brulees or anything like this application, they just have too much heat in too confined and too direct a space. So I like propane as opposed to butane because we're putting out more heat in a wider range, and it helps us get better broiling and melting that cheese. So let's get this guy broiled up. So we want to get this cheese nice and brown, but we want to do this process a little bit slowly because we want to have it a chance to melt as opposed to just browning it on the top. And then I like to garnish this with just a little bit of fresh thyme. You can use chives, scallions, parsley, whatever you've got on hand. But there we go, French onion soup. We cut in, we see we've got the cheese melt, some of that crouton. Oh, beautiful. Well, guys, I would love to stick around a little longer, but I've got this beautiful hot bowl of French onion soup in front of me, and it's not going to eat itself. So as always, thanks for stopping by the channel today. If you make this, please let us know in the comment section how it turned out. Let us know what questions you have. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, get those notifications when we release videos weekly, and let us know anything else you'd love to see us make. Thanks.